I have a few thoughts that I want to share on sharing the gospel and how that's analogous to cooking. So I have the scripture here: Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Now, the hunger and thirst part seems sort of obvious. It's this idea that anybody who is truly hungry and thirsting and seeking after righteousness with all their heart shall be filled. But I want to focus on how are they filled and what role do other people play in that filling. So I have an analogy here. I want you to think of three separate people or three separate items. We've got the food, we have the eater, and we have the cook. And throughout this presentation, I will treat the food as analogous to light and truth. So anything that we are doing in order to procure or prepare food, in order to give it to people, is the same thing that we would do in order to procure and prepare light and truth in order to share with someone. Eaters are those that receive the food from the cooks and choose whether or not to eat it. It's very important to understand that while you can be the best cook in the world and you can spend as much time as possible preparing delicious meals for others, that you cannot force them to eat those meals. It's that old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink. And this is one of the hardest parts about sharing the gospel, is that there is suffering involved, because more often than not, you will spend an exceptional amount of time in preparation and pondering, figuring out how you can help a specific person take their next step towards God. And they will more often than not turn away from that or be offended by it or just take it lightly or not receive it at all. And despite that, we still do it anyway out of love and out of following the pattern of the master. Cooks are analogous to those that share light and truth. It should also be stated that at any given point in time, all people are eaters and all people should be cooks. And we always are eating and hungering and thirsting for that light and truth that comes from above, whether that's wherever we are in the line of people that connect us all the way up to the Father. And as soon as we get fed, we immediately turn and we feed others what we've been fed in a way that they'll receive it, because the goal is to make sure that everybody down to the very last person is filled as much as they desire to be filled. So let's talk about the food for a minute. The food, again, is analogous to the word or light or truth. And food exists in many forms in the world and in many levels of processing. So I have a couple of different examples up here. First, I have this chain here of wheat. So out in the world, you can find wild, unharvested wheat of different varieties. And it might be growing in bushels here and there, but it's probably not growing in a large field. But it definitely exists, and you could go and you could harvest it. And it probably wouldn't be enough to sustain life or even make a loaf of bread. But if you harvested it carefully and kept the seeds and then replanted them, eventually you could gain enough wheat to have a cultivated field. And so you might have a cultivated wheat field that has a lot of wheat in it. Just because you have a wheat field does not mean that you have something that's necessarily edible, or at least to most people. And so you further process that by harvesting it and winnowing it and blowing away the chaff and doing all that good stuff. And you end up with edible wheat berries. And even though they wouldn't necessarily be the most palatable things to eat, you could eat them just like that. Or you could further process them into flour, which is one of the oldest things known to man in terms of cooking. And you could either boil those wheat berries and turn them into wheat porridge, to which you could add other ingredients and make it sort of a warm, comforting food. Or obviously the ultimate outcome of flour is to bake bread of some kind with it. And so when you're looking at all of these different types of processing, these different types of word, you have to understand that there are very few people that are willing to receive anything less processed than a loaf of bread and maybe some wheat porridge. It is exceptionally rare to find somebody who grows their own wheat for their bread. And it's even pretty rare to find somebody who would just maybe purchase wheat berries and then they would grind their own flour and do what they wanted with that. Almost nobody is willing to go search for a new wild grain strain and then cultivate it and process it to the point where everybody else could use it one day. And I say almost no one because there are some people who are willing to do that. And in the scriptures, if we're thinking about that in terms of light and truth, these people are what you would call a revelator. These are people that go and they search the very most wild parts of the world, and they go to God in full willingness of heart and willingness to suffer and to pay any price necessary to obtain light and truth, often in ways that have never been revealed before, and then process that into something through faith that everyone else can have. And so anytime that someone claims to be a revelator, you should look for the fruits of that claim, because they should be putting forth ideas and teachings that are commensurate with that level of faith. If what someone's giving you is repackaged frozen food, something that you've had a million times before, claiming that they're a revelator, then I would ask you to consider if that's true or not. And one of the reasons for that is it takes so much more faith to produce food when something is not processed. So whether we're talking about actual skill in farming or willingness to farm, or we're talking about preaching the gospel, or we're talking about anything, the harder something is, and the less somebody knows about it, and the more rare something is, almost always it requires an exceptional amount of faith in order to produce. And faith is Pareto distributed in people, just like most skills or qualities. Here's some other things to consider about looking at how processed food is and how processed the word that you're getting is. The more processed the food is that you're eating, two things occur. It's much more palatable, so it tastes better and better, right? If we could probably keep going down this list of wheat, and I think 2 or 3 more steps down that chain, we'd get to Pop-Tarts probably. And nothing's more palatable than a Pop-Tart, but there's almost nothing redeeming nutrition-wise about it. So technically, when you eat a Pop-Tart, you could say, I'm still eating wheat, but there's so much more about a Pop-Tart that is bad compared to wheat. And that's the cost. The more palatable something becomes, the much more likely it is to be or to have unhealthy additions that go along with the good part. You can see this also in this image that I have here of the chickens. So, I mean, you have just a normal living chicken that would get processed into a raw chicken that you could process into a roast chicken, or you could process it all the way down to chicken nuggets. And most people today, and unfortunately, especially many of them children, much prefer their chicken in nugget form. And while chicken nuggets, I think, are still technically chicken, they do have a good amount of protein in them and much of the benefits of chicken. They also come with the additional breading and oils, and they're usually served with a sweet, sugary sauce, all of which is just there in order to persuade someone to eat them. And if someone was willing to eat just this roast chicken as opposed to the chicken nuggets, they would get all of the same benefits without any of the downsides of the chicken nuggets. So that's very important to think of. The more processed the word gets, so the farther down the chain of messengers the word goes, the farther away from the source of living waters, the more muddy that word will get. And I think it just makes like 3 metaphors there, but I think you get what I'm saying. So consider that. Be more willing to go to more pure sources of food to get it. And if you find yourself a cook who cooks only with the best ingredients, stick around, eat what they're giving you. But if you have enough faith, go ask them how to cook so that you can learn to do it yourself. And that's the whole point. Any true servant, any true cook is more than willing to teach you how to cook yourself up to their current skill level. I think that's enough about the food. So let's talk about eaters, right? Many people have food preferences, and these range from mild to severe. And so let's think about these preferences and how they could stop one from eating food that they should eat. So preferences like this around food, I'm going to liken into constraints. So, back a few weeks ago, I released a video about Revelation and comparing that to starlight, and we talked about filters and how the filters that we have strain the amount of light that we might otherwise receive from God down to something smaller than it should be. And food preferences do this exact same thing when we're using this metaphor for eaters. And so there are lots of reasons people won't eat certain types of food. Sometimes they won't eat it because they don't like it if it's raw, but they will like it if it's cooked. For example, sushi. Some people just get grossed out at the thought of eating raw fish, but they'll eat cooked fish just fine. And so, maybe there's not a lot lost there, but you certainly won't have the experience and some of the good things that are from eating sushi. Some people won't eat something they generally like that has something they specifically don't like in it. So, like, for example, onions. I think it's pretty common to have to know somebody or to be somebody that doesn't like onions. And while there are some dishes that you could prepare without onions, such that you don't really lose too much of what the dish is intended to be, there are certainly some things, like French onion soup, for example, that you won't even be able to eat at all if you don't like onions. And so if you don't budge on that preference, you'll never experience that or get the benefit of it. Some people won't eat something just because of things that have nothing to do with food, like the food itself. Like, it's not about its taste or its texture or something. It's about like their a moral code, or maybe they're vegetarian, or they have a code of health. Like LDS people have the word of wisdom that says they don't drink alcohol or tea or coffee. And again, this is not a commentary on whether the food preferences are right or wrong, but just think about the constraints that you have about what things you will and will not eat. And sometimes people just flat out refuse to eat things they're not familiar with or that's new. You might hear a kid say, I only like what my mom makes, or maybe they like one type of, I don't know, pizza place, but they won't eat somewhere else. And that way, while they might be satisfied with the thing that they're currently having, they have no way of knowing if there is a better version of that thing somewhere else. And unless you're willing to try to find that better thing, you'll never know. So I hit some of these as we were talking through the different types of preferences, but depending on how many and how strong your food preferences are, there'll be many dishes that will be reduced in potency or have their desired effect. Like if there's 5 types of things that you won't eat, and something has to be gluten-free, and you can't have onions and whatever, like, you're drastically reducing what types of foods that you could eat, and there will definitely be some dishes that are completely off the table. And pun intended. And this is terrible, because what if that food was the best tasting food you've ever eaten, would have been the best tasting food you've ever eaten in your life? What if it would have been the most healthy or the most beneficial for your body? What if there's a food that would completely alleviate some pain or suffering or sickness that you have that you refuse to eat because of a preference like that. I think if that was clear to you, then you would be very upset about that. And yet we do this all the time with truth that people offer us or improvement that people offer us. We decide that it doesn't apply to us for reasons that don't really hold up if we think about them rationally. And that's just to say again, there are some foods that taste absolutely terrible, and there's no reason to eat it if all you're optimizing for is palatability, but they might be incredibly good for you and might have all kinds of amazing health benefits. So we need to do our best as eaters to eliminate these preferences and these constraints, and we need to feast upon the words of Christ. We need to receive the word of God from whatever source we can find it from, and we need to not reject that word until we have tried it and given it space to grow. And once, going to this Alma 32 metaphor of the seed, if we take the seed into us and we work with it a bit, and it turns out that it's not good, then don't ever eat that food ever again. Just kick it to the curb. But at least you have reasons for not incorporating it into your life. If you reject putative truth without a reason, you're cutting yourself off from what could and definitely will make you better and more like God. Now let's talk about being the cook. So the purpose of a cook is to alleviate hunger and thirst. So when we're a cook in the gospel, we are leading people to the bread of life with Jesus, which is Jesus, and cooks are themselves becoming springs of living water, just like Jesus said that they would be. And it's absolutely the worst outcome when you're someone who's trying to feed others, for them to leave hungry when you have the food. Now, if someone comes to you and they're hungry and you don't have any food, it's very hard to feel bad about that. But many times you will be given opportunities to use something good that you have, some improvement that you know, some skill or encouragement or correction or something that's unique to you, and you'll be presented with people all the time who need that from you. And if you're unwilling to at least try to give it to them, then you miss a huge opportunity to benefit them and to help them become closer to God. That being said, the way that you do this is by preparing and processing what you do have down to where somebody will accept it, or at least will give them the best opportunity or the best chance to accept it. So just like cooks do with food, right? So you take whatever the raw food is, and with your own skill and knowledge and experience, you break it down, you cook it, you add things to it that will make it more palatable, and you serve it. And there's lots of different ways that a cook might approach getting someone to eat. One really important way that I have listed here: cooks may better season. So, for example, they might use salt, a dish that the eater is already familiar with, to get them to eat it or try it again. And it turns out that there is a large amount of difference between somebody who knows how to season food and someone who doesn't. And even if you make the exact same thing, the experience in eating that food is completely different. And so sometimes people have been presented with truth, but it wasn't presented quite in the right way or was with the right flavoring in order to help them to see exactly how it would benefit them, or for it to be exactly palatable to them. And it's really important to understand the purpose of salt when it's talked about scripturally. As Jesus said, that we're the salt of the earth and that we can't lose our savor, but also one of the duties of a priest in the Old Testament was to salt the sacrifices that people brought to the tabernacle or to the temple. And that salt purified the sacrifice that people brought, and it made it better and it made it more appealing to God. And so anytime that we're adding salt or seasoning a dish to make it more appealing, we're acting in the duties of a priest. Cooks might also try to persuade an eater to eat good food that they haven't tried before despite their biases. So, right, this first time with the seasoning, you're augmenting truth that they already have. When you were persuading people to eat food they haven't tried before, you're offering them new truth. And lots of times people will be at least willing to give something a try. Sometimes not, but they will. But other times, cooks may persuade eaters to stop eating bad food in order to eat better food. And this is what you might call replacement truth, where you might be trying to convince somebody that, hey, you really shouldn't eat this one thing ever again. Like, you should eat this instead. And here's all the reasons why. And I promise you that as you try to do that, that people are going to be pretty upset with you. We're trying to convince them that things that they hold near and dear to their heart are things that they shouldn't eat and try something instead. And food is actually a great analogy for this with truth, because there's few things that people take more seriously than the things they like to eat. So how does one become a good cook? Right, and I have good in quotes here because of the connotation of becoming a good shepherd, or becoming like the good shepherd. And it's the same, but you cannot be a good cook unless you are acquainted with at least with the food that you're intending to prepare for other people. So it's not that you're required to know how to cook all dishes, but when you are preparing something for someone else, you better well know how to make it yourself and have made it many times yourself and have the skill there. Otherwise, there's a large chance that what you're about to do is going to go wrong. The best cooks do know many dishes, and not only do they know how to cook specific meals like from a recipe, they've graduated from that and they've extracted the principles of the different types of dishes that they have, or that they've known how to make. And so, one of the great things to learn as you learn how to cook is that you might start by reading very specific recipes and following them. And you're like, maybe you're baking a certain type of baked good, or you're grilling meat or something. And eventually, after you read enough recipes and follow them, you realize that there are similarities in all these different types of recipes. And all of a sudden, you gain this ability to know how to do things or make food more delicious or prepare it better, just based on principles alone and not with having to follow a recipe. And you actually stop really needing to use them most of the time. Sometimes you look at them for reference, but good cooks cook by feeling, I think they say. And so that is also true as you're learning to share the gospel with other people. If you haven't graduated from having to read a set list of principles or a set list of things that they should know, to being able to tailor exactly what they need to know, like for them based. Let me start that over. You need to tailor to the person you're sharing the gospel with exactly what their next step is in improvement, without putting unnecessary packaging around that truth that you're offering, that would complicate or obfuscate the source of that improvement. So also here, number 3, I have becoming a good cook requires eating your own bad cooking. And that's a funny way of thinking about repentance, I think, but it's also a way of thinking about sanctification as you try in sincerity to do your best to cook things. Especially when you start, it's going to not be great. It's just there's going to be a lot left on the table, but you will immediately learn how you could make it better the next time you try it. So you learn from eating your own bad food and how you could improve, but you also learn from eating other people's good food. Just like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's a chain of cooks and eaters that go all the way from the top to the bottom. And so the more you feast on things that are good, the more you learn how to make those good things yourself. So to sum up, what is required of becoming a cook, cooks look at the people that they're trying to feed and they get a good idea of their food preferences, and they do their best to give them the food that they need while working with the food preferences that the eater has. And they might do that through, as we explained before, reseasoning or persuading them in different ways to try to get them to try something new. But for the most part, cooks are taking raw ingredients, things that are hard to obtain, and they're processing them down to something that's edible. And then through that sacrifice of that time and that effort to process it and to cook it, they're giving that food to others who wouldn't be able to receive it any other way. Or in other words, others who won't cook for themselves. And this is one of the most important ways that we become like the Lord, in that we give people things that they aren't able to receive for themselves because they're unwilling to do what they need to do in order to receive it. Now, we've been talking about cooks this entire time. I wanted to ask this one question that's related, and that is, what is the difference between a cook and a chef? And it's kind of an odd question, but cooks are primarily involved in the preparation of food. And this is a wonderful skill, and it's a wonderful thing. But a chef is more than a cook. And I think I have it down here on bullet under this fourth bullet down here, but all chefs can cook, but not all cooks are chefs. So what's the big difference? And there's three main ways that a cook is different from a chef, or I guess the other way around. A chef is different than a cook. And the very first is leadership. So a chef, in addition to just knowing how to cook, has to run a whole kitchen. They manage the entire staff of under chefs and other people. And oftentimes they are the owner and operator of the business as well. So the restaurant that they're owning. So it's not just that the chef is spending all their time cooking the food, but instead they are training other people to be as valuable as possible to make good food and to produce more of it than they could by themselves. And so chefs, through their leadership, are able to create and make more things than they otherwise would be able to, and help others to do the same. Chefs also have vision that cooks do not. So chefs have a singular vision for their restaurant, and they ask and help the people that work for them to align with that vision. And so if a chef had a vision to have the best taco restaurant in the entire world, and one of their under chefs is over there making a turkey dinner, a good chef would go over there and first ask them why. And, if they learned something new or there were some good ideas, they'd actually incorporate that. But more than likely, they're going to correct them and say, hey, man, we're trying to make tacos right now. Okay. We're not making turkey dinners. We'll do that another time, maybe. But we have to all be aligned in this one vision because our job is to make tacos. And it's that leadership and vision that allows the chef to accomplish their goal, to help that other person who should be making tortillas probably stop wasting their time making turkeys. The final thing that a chef has is knowledge. So a chef's level of knowledge is far, far greater than the average short order cook. They know so much more about food. They have so much more experience with food. And they've tried every ingredient, probably raw in forms, and oftentimes things that are much less palatable than other people would be willing to do. So, we talked about people not liking onions earlier. Would you be willing to take a bite out of an onion like you would an apple? Or would you be willing to take a bite out of 7 different kinds of onions in order to find out which ones were the least pleasant to eat and why, and what the differences between them were, and suffer the consequences of doing that all in one day? Most people would not be willing to do that, but a chef would, and that's why they're the chef. It's because of how they are. So with that difference, I would ask this final follow-up question: what's the difference between a priest and a king? And maybe I'll leave that for you to think about. It's very important to learn how to be both a priest and a king, and realize that Jesus is the King of Kings. And maybe you could say he is the chef of chefs. I didn't point it out, but I did find this delightful little image as I was quickly researching the hierarchy of a kitchen. And this image is very interesting with the executive chef and the head chef and the deputy chef. Notice that there's three above everybody else, and that it all comes down in a chain all the way down to the wait staff who are serving the kitchen, or the customers from the kitchen. So maybe I'll leave that on here and y'all can ponder it, the organization, and how there's always truth in strange places, and how the hierarchy of heaven may look somewhat similar to this. Take care.